Today's class we will essentially focus on one of the more important topics in the entire course, and essentially the most important one within the production side of things, which is costs, or understanding the different costs that firms face whenever they produce. So the idea of cost functions is as follows. Up until this point, we have focused on, in the part that regards to production, on how production is limited by technology. And that basically that implies that you use certain technological processes to transform inputs into outputs. And that obviously depends on the type of industry you have. And also that substituting inputs, you can reach a different level or the same level of production that you have targeted, but through different ways, and that those differences in production can result in differences in costs. And that's why understanding costs is so important, because at the end of the day, one of the things that as firm managers that you will have to understand, or if you're working for a firm, is what is the cheapest way to produce any given level of output, and what level of output maximizes profits, which are two intertwined concepts, but not necessarily the same. So, last class we discussed about this idea about the marginal product, and how the marginal product is essentially just how much more output, how much more units of output can a firm reach, or does a firm have every time you use an extra unit of one of the inputs. And those inputs may be labor, those inputs may be capital, those inputs may be other inputs that you're using for the particular um, the particular industrial process in which you're in. So if this is one of the most important things, it happens because firms want to minimize costs. And before we enter into this idea of how to minimize costs, we need to take into account that there are different types of costs. And in general, in economics, there are two types of costs that are relevant to a firm. One are literally the explicit, or let's call them the accounting costs, which are all the payments that you do, or the firm does, to specific inputs, like the wages you pay to workers, or the rent you pay for the industrial ship in which you're producing, or whatever type of different costs you have to actually pay with money. And then you have another concept that we briefly discussed in some moment during the during the consumer side of things, when we were still on campus. And it's this idea of the opportunity cost, which is what is the second best alternative that you could use your resources for instead of what you're going to do. So if I want to produce this particular product with these inputs, and that costs me X amount of money, and that's the amount of money that I have to pay, what could I do with that particular money instead? Would it be more profitable? Would it be less profitable? Would it be the same? And that type of decisions, even though they are not being counted in terms of your balance sheets and the finances of the firm, you always have to have them on the back of your mind. Think of how for example, what happens when you have an economic recession or depression, as the one we're facing right now with the COVID pandemic? So when firms start to sell much less because they're closed, and there's a smaller amount of demand, there is always this tendency through governments about reducing the interest rates. And even though we will discuss into depth this part when we reach the macroeconomic section of this course, the idea behind this is just an opportunity cost idea. So if you are a business owner, and you are considering, and you have an X amount of money, and you are considering starting a business, maybe not essentially like today, but like in the next couple of months, and that business would potentially be profitable and you estimate that it will have, I don't know, like a 10% return rate, then there are other options for which you could use your money. Other options could be other businesses that you could invest, businesses that already exist. You could buy stock for them from those businesses in the stock exchange, or you could essentially just save that money with other financial instruments, uh, different kinds of them, and have a particular return. And you have to consider and compare those returns from like just saving the money, like with financial instruments and with bonds or stocks, versus taking the risk of investing in some business and maybe being more profitable and having a higher return. That is a type of decision that opportunity costs consider. And in the case of this class, we will focus much more on the explicit costs, but it's always important to understand how opportunity costs can affect the way certain decisions are made in a firm. What are the firms focusing on basically on their costs when they have to produce? And the first one and the main cost that they actually take into account is essentially called the total cost. And the total cost function is basically just the sum of all the different costs that you are considering within your firm. Everything that basically you have to pay for in order to produce one unit of at least one unit of your whatever you're producing is contemplated within the total cost function. And for the purpose of this class, we will define the total cost function basically as the function C of Y. And Y is the argument because basically Y is the level of output. The more units you produce, the higher the cost because you have to basically hire more people, you have to buy more inputs, you have to do a bunch of stuff. So obviously this total cost function or has to consider the level of output and the volume you are deciding to produce. The total cost is essentially composed of two big categories: fixed costs and variable costs. And as the slide reads, the fixed costs are essentially all those things that you need to produce, like a factory that you're renting, or the industrial ship that you had to buy, or the land that you're paying, or whatever it is, basically, that you need them to produce, even if you're still not producing anything. So if you want to open a business and you want to basically start, think of a restaurant, and you want to start selling dinners and meals, you first need literally your location and your store or your restaurant and all the infrastructure within the equipment, the furniture, the connection to the water, the electricity, all those type of stuff that at the but specifically think of like the things that you pay once, like the furniture or like the actual rent that you have to pay every month. Even if you're closed and still not operating, you have to have it in order to basically start producing at least one unit, and therefore you have to pay it for it. And that those type of costs are called the fixed costs because they don't change no matter how much inputs you decide, how much output you decide to produce. So basically, even if you want to produce one unit or 1,000 units, you're still paying for the same industrial ship. Yes, in real life, if you grow so much that you need to buy a second factory and stuff like that, obviously your fixed costs will start to increase and will change as you continue to expand. But as long as you can accommodate everything within that particular land or that plot or that particular industrial ship or stuff like that, your fixed costs are more or less constant every month, in the sense that you're paying for the rent of this every month, and it doesn't matter if I'm using 15 workers or only using one worker. It doesn't matter if you're producing one unit or you're producing 1,000 units. You still have to pay the rent of the industrial ship within the particular industrial park in which your firm is located. But then the counterpart is the variable costs. The variable costs are essentially all those costs directly associated to the level of production you're thinking of producing. So if you want to continue to produce and expand, you need to hire more workers to basically be able to like continue to expand, or you need to use more natural gas in your process, or you need to use actually even more electricity, or you need to whatever, you need to buy more inputs from that particular firm or import them from another country because they're cheaper. But if you're producing 1 million units, you probably need many more inputs than if you were just producing 1,000 units. So obviously, those costs are directly associated to the particular level of production, and they are called the variable costs. For the sake of this class, we will refer to them in notation form in this like CV or with regards to Y, the level of output. The fixed costs are just referred to F. Questions regarding the idea of the three main costs: total costs, fixed costs, and variable costs. Okay, they're more or less self-explanatory. This is a brief example that I scanned from the book, in which basically it shows you more or less how you take into account these costs and you add them up. So as you can see in the first column that reads quantity, you have basically the quantity of production, how many units you are producing to sell and place in the market. And you pass from 0 units being produced to 6 units in this example. And as you can see, they have 3 columns: fixed costs, variable costs, and total costs. And the fixed costs, let's think always of like the rent for the factory in which you are producing things. It's the simplest way of thinking of it. The variable costs are hiring workers and other inputs that you need to produce more units. And the total costs are literally just the sum of fixed costs plus variable costs. You get total costs. So as you see in the first line, the first row of the table, and you're still not producing anything, you're basically just like setting up, getting everything together, ready to produce. You still have to pay the rent for your industrial ship that you're gonna use, like 55, whatever it is, 55 million, it doesn't matter the units. You're not producing anything, so you basically still are not hiring workers nor buying inputs, but you have to pay those fixed costs, and that is already taking into account into your total cost. And as you start producing and continue to expand and produce more units, you need more inputs. So the variable costs start to increase, 30, 55, 75, and so on, while the fixed costs are just a monthly fee that you have to pay, that it's fixed, and you basically add them up. That is more or less how a total cost structure works with respect to the two simplest costs that we're working with. Questions after this table? So this is a graphical representation, more or less, of how these 3 costs work. Like from the previous table, if you graph those numbers, you would see, and you graph in this way, that you have level of output, Q or Y, or whatever letter you want to use on the x-axis, which is the number of units you are producing of your final good, and the money basically on the y-axis that you have to pay for that. So the fixed costs are essentially just a constant fee that you have to pay every time it doesn't matter how much you are producing. So that's why it's a horizontal line. But the variable cost and the total cost, C of Y and ZV of Y, have a particular and the same type of structure. Because obviously, the more and more and more units you produce, the higher the inputs cost that you face, because you're hiring more workers, buying more inputs. So therefore, that has to translate into the total cost. And the difference between the total cost, the yellow curve, and the variable cost, the blue curve, is literally just those initial fixed costs. Así se ven más o menos los costos.